Alright, time for another draftphysics.com video presentation. Debate physics also. Unfortunately, at the current moment, I'm not going to be publishing videos on the usual schedule. So, I guess I will post this video. But frankly, I wanted the last video to be up for a longer period of time as the video. So I might just delist this one after I list it. And I will be making other videos that I'm going to leave unlisted, and I'll make them public in the future at some point. But as has been made apparent, is the conversation is the audience is way too limited, and it's just sort of a waste of time. So until we can find somebody who can interact, that is, make response videos to my 5-minute videos, there really isn't anything to do here, frankly. So the lever experiment. So I'm going to publish this video just because, okay, physicist Michael's finally got around to it, but he's doing some weird live thing. All right, so he's posted this whatever. It will be a video in 2 days, but not now. And I guess he's going to do the results live for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a great idea, frankly. But I just figured I would point out right from the start all the mistakes he's made and all the mistakes that are in this video. And there are things we talked about in the original video. He's not going to do those things. He's not going to really make this video have any kind of merit or credibility. And so it's really a non-advancement of the experiment because it is done to contrive results. He's deliberately trying to force the experiment to come out his way. And that will become apparent when the experiment's done correctly, eventually. Okay, so let's go over some of the... Look, I found out that no matter what you're using, the lever does consume quite a bit of energy. So that's the first problem with the theoretical experiment. And you only find this out because, you got to do this stuff to find out how it doesn't work all the time and how you really do need the right equipment. That's also a necessity to be able to measure these velocities, because they have to be velocities at the point of impact and velocities at the point of release and all of that. But anyway, so the basic experiment is just to create a lever, and the idea is the simple truth is that you could have a 2 mass here and a 1 mass here at 2 units of distance, and it would be an equal. They're balanced on a lever, on a balance. They'll balance. If you hang them, they'll balance. All right, and it can oscillate and all of that. And the idea is just to put this in with some energy, put some force in on one side and see what you get on the other side. So obviously there are lots of ways to do this experiment. You could just argue that a smarter way would just to have a constant force hit this side and just try it with a 2 mass here and then try it with a 1 mass here and see what kind of results you get. See if you get twice the velocity here, which you're sort of obligated, I would argue. Okay, physics basically said if this was a gear and you put energy into the gear, okay, say this was a gear with teeth all the way around, and you put energy into the gear, angular momentum dictates this is going to be essentially the same as moving the 2 mass on the smaller radius will be the same energy as this 1 mass on the further radius, and that's a fact. So this is sort of the catapult argument. So there's lots of points to make about what's the best way to do the experiment. So as was pointed out in the discussion we had, the first thing you got to know is how much is your lever stealing. Now see, the advantage of doing the catapult thing, okay, the idea is this is what I decided to do for this experiment, is I put a rubber band here and create a constant force at a location and then just do it with the 2 different experiments with the same amount of force pushing, because that way how much energy the lever consumes, just moving the lever. The problem is I can do the experiment, I have a rubber band, I got a lever. The fact is if I allow an object to drop on the lever, it has to move the lever itself. The lever itself is going to consume some of the energy. and you have to figure out how much of that energy is going to be taken out of your experiment. So your results are going to be cheated by that. In the case of the catapult, you eliminate that problem because both trials will have the same lever in them. Both trials will be moving the same lever, so the lever will be consuming the same amount of force out of the whatever you're using to apply the force. And so the test will really be honest because the lever won't be consuming any of the energy of the object actually falling. So you can't just drop a 2 mass and then launch a 1 mass over here because you've got to move the lever too. So you're not going to get 100% of the force over here because you move this entire lever. So that's the downside. Alright, but there's lots of other downsides. So as I did state in the original video, the conversation, the first thing, he's doing a lot of these spring things. So he's bouncing something into the lever, okay, with a spring on it. I mean, he has a crappy, he has a big geary thing here, okay, which, isn't even on center. So he's got a gear that he's attached the lever to, so it rotates on that gear. Anyway, on that bearing, when all you really need is a fulcrum. All you need is the force is always going to be against the lever. So if we're going this way, all you need is a fulcrum. That would just make the carts come down. It's easier to understand. But all you need is a point. Because the lever is going to be pushed into it no matter what you do, and it's only directional. The only direction that the force will be from the lever is in. And just have to have a very rigid fulcrum, by the way. Alright, so the first experiment I suggested doing was running his, again, they're on a track, which is, again, a disadvantage. But my first argument was the first thing you got to do is run your car just into the lever and see how much energy it consumes. So you see how much velocity you lose, okay? V2, V1, V2. See how much you lose just tilting the lever. That's, you have to know that first. And then the first experiment you would do is put your 2 tracks at the same distance. So let's see if he actually did this experiment, which I doubt he did. Do the same experiment. Do this. It's the same distance. And see how much of the momentum is conserved. How much of the kinetic energy is conserved. Same difference because we're using the same mass at the same distance. And see if what you put in over here comes out over here. And that'll tell you a huge amount about how credible your experiment's going to be. Because if you're losing 50% of the energy, that is, if you can't convert this motion into this motion without this mechanism stealing half the energy, flaws in the lever itself, there's no real point in continuing. Will we see that? No. Alright, and then what else is he doing? He's putting springs on the cars. Now, I said in that original video, I don't even want to hear about it. I don't even want to know. I don't want to hear it, okay? Any concept of a spring. Why would I put a spring on the car? That's not going to help transfer the energy. That's going to help interfere with the transfer. The spring will do absolutely nothing to help transfer the energy from this side to this side. Creating a potential for a reflection is the last thing you want to do. So all of the spring experiments, in my opinion, are junk. And the only value they could possibly have is to see how much of the momentum you conserved. And you probably won't even do that. Probably won't even give that analysis. I'll have to go figure that out myself. So he's going to have a cart that goes in, and it's going to reflect a certain percentage, okay? And then this cart will move with a certain percentage, all right? And that's completely not the experiment we're trying to do. We're trying to take all of the energy from, say, a 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour, right? A 5 going 10, and we're trying to put it into a 10, okay? And we hope to get it to go 5. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take all the energy out of this object and put it in the other object. We're not trying to create bounces. And so then he said something about protecting his car, and he had some rubber thing on the end. Same difference. So if he's just going to do an experiment with a rubber thing on the end or a spring on the end, then none of it's my experiment. I mean, it's none of it's the one I suggested, and it's one I overtly complained about in the live video, in the conversation. I made my objections clear that ideally what you really want to do is get all the energy out of one cart and put it in the other cart, and that's what you're trying to do as gracefully as possible. You can see from the image, anyway, that he's using a 1:3, okay, ratio of mass. All right, and now that's a whole nother problem with the setup. Now, what I noticed when I was doing the experiments, even with the rubber band, the other thing you have to fix, okay, is that when you do this experiment, unless you have a very, very long lever, the problem is as you move positions, well, let me probably draw that. I'll draw this. That's a straight line there, okay. And then you go to this position. All right, when you do that, what happens is you start with the object here on the lever, and what it does is it slides on the lever. So this will be, say, 5 inches here, but by the time it leaves, it's slid all the way up here, and so now it's like 7 inches. So the problem is you're changing how heavy the object's getting as you're pushing it. See, I noticed, I was wondering why when I did it with the rubber band, right, and you push it, and then you can watch that actually happen, the sliding thing. But the thing I found curious was this never reaches the faster velocity than the lever. The lever's kind of pushing into it, and there's a point where you'd expect this object to have more velocity than the lever, and it seems like it never acquires that. It never seems to go faster than the lever's moving. The lever stays in contact with it all the way through, and it ends up pushing it sort of on an arc. And that's a downside also, obviously. So, and the reason I speculated was, obviously why that's happening is because this object's getting heavier and heavier. So as the lever's putting force into it, it's getting heavier and heavier. It's further out on the lever. And so it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier as the lever swings. And that's why the lever's sticking to it. It's because it's harder and harder to push. And so what you really need to do is have a stop here, right? So you have a stop at the 5-inch point. And that way this object can't slide down the lever. Now obviously he can't do that with this cart setup, right? With this track going through, you can't possibly put a stop on there, but so just pull it off the track. So there has to be some other way to create a sticking, where the object isn't bouncing off, and where you're not changing its position on the lever. You gotta create some mechanism to protect against that problem. So it's happening on both sides. So the incoming side is also getting heavier, okay, as it's pushing on the lever. It's pushing further and further out on the lever, and it's just not ideal. So anyway, so that's something I did notice. But at least with the rubber band idea, the catapult idea at least eliminates the problem of the lever itself consuming so much energy. And I clearly got results that, from just appearance, okay, appear to be a substantial amount of this energy. The two mass is the one mass is going substantially faster. But anyway, we'll see. Because I just don't have the technology to measure the speeds at this time. But, maybe I will acquire it. It's just ironic that this hasn't already been done, right? The very fact that we have to do these experiments for the first time in recorded scientific history, it's never been recorded what happens when you do this with a lever, seems preposterous. I think there's plenty of people who've used catapults, and they know if I put a half mass twice the distance, it's going to go twice as fast and twice as far. I think they already know all of that. Anyway, unfortunately, they're not in this audience and can't testify to that fact. So, so that's the big point is that you have to start by finding out how much you're losing in the system, and I bet you he just couldn't have been bothered to do that. And so without knowing that, you have to really do the experiment where you put the the same mass cart in one side, the same mass cart on the other side, and see how much you're capable of transferring. And if you're not capable of transferring something in the 80 or 90%, then you've got to redesign the experiment, because it's just not going to be good enough. Not going to give you right answers. Alright, should have pointed out one thing I didn't try, just because I didn't want to do it until I had to, because there was no other option. You could put a stop. So as the lever's turning, you just put a stop so it can't go any further. That way it eliminates some of this sliding. So there'd be a certain amount of energy you get in this little distance, and you could argue that that should be proportional. I'm just a little bit uncertain how proportional it is, so that's why I didn't do it, because I would first like to be able to do the experiment without putting a stop and get it to see if I can get all the energy or most of the energy to transfer. Well, I'm not transferring in this case. I'm just putting it in the heavy mass and then in the light mass. I mean, I just think it's more ideal to allow all the energy that's in your force to be used to push the objects for as long as possible, rather than a short impulse. But the impulse should be proportional to the whole thing, so it shouldn't matter. So, that might be a way to evade some of this sliding problem and keep the energy in the object. So just point that out. Obviously the sliding problem can also be a rolling problem, or a twisting problem, or a turning problem, depending on what shape object you use. Alright, so the only good news of his fake and phony video, he says right in this little text, I'll read it. I finally finished the lever launcher experiment with over 26 different trials covering 13 different physical setups. So he did 2 trials for each physical setup, whatever that means. Data shows that angular momentum is conserved to a high accuracy in the collision. So I don't know why he's using the term angular momentum. Angular momentum is what a gear does. It conserves momentum. Alright, it doesn't conserve kinetic energy. It conserves momentum. So I don't know why he's phrasing it that way, but whatever. In collisions, and you do not get free energy out of the experiment. So again, he's saying that somehow the lighter object moves at 1.4. So that's his, I suppose, argument. Now, we're not going to see any of that, because I really don't think he did the experiment without putting a spring on it. Okay, so I don't think we're going to see any trials where there isn't a reflection. That's my prediction. That we won't see any trials that don't involve a reflection. Alright, so as I've demonstrated, so the problem with the horizontal lever, right? The great news is you get gravity out of the equation. You don't have to think about dropping weights and all this other stuff. But the problem with doing the lever flat is the energy problem. Now you have to actually move the lever. So when I did this, simple thing of just making a balance, okay, and hanging 4 masses, 1 distance and 1 mass, 4 distances, okay, 4. And it balances perfectly, okay, and it oscillates. So if you put a little bit of energy, just a touch, and it'll keep going and going and going. So very efficient. This is just hanging from a string. Alright, and so the thing works. It did exactly what you'd expect, okay. It balances and it stays in balance and it oscillates. So the energy essentially goes from one side to the other side. It's essentially a rigidly coupled oscillator. And this moves with 1 velocity, and this moves with 4 velocity. So 4 times the distance in every oscillation here as you got here. Facts. These are all just facts. So clearly the lever all by itself will do this. So if I take the weights off, it oscillates fine. And it oscillates fine with the weights on. So clearly there's no loss of anything to any lever. And so you could just understand that what's the real thing happening. The oscillator is moving the energy from side to side, and clearly all the energy is being conserved. You can't say there's twice the kinetic energy in this oscillation and half that amount in this oscillation. When this side oscillates, it's half the kinetic energy. So if I did, at the right moments, release the objects when they're moving in their maximum velocity, and I let them fly into space, the fact is this one's going to fly away with 1v and 4 mass, and this one's going to be 1 mass going 4 velocity, and the fact is this one's going to leave with twice the kinetic energy of this one. Same momentum, but twice the kinetic energy. So in a sense, this experiment already proves that statement by him wrong. The fact is you have to get free energy out. It's the very function of the balance. They're equal weights. You're pushing an equal weight. You're applying a force to an equal weight. And the outcome is certain in terms of conserving the momentum, because momentum is weight. So you will conserve the momentum. There's no 1.4 thing happening here anywhere. This isn't 1.4ing. Okay, so that notion is dead. So I'm saying that he's got to still debunk this experiment. All right, and the point is it'll be eventually shown. So anything good about him doing this video is it's going to be a contrived piece of garbage. It's going to show that physics just fakes it to prove their equations. It's going to prove the point that you can't trust any of these liars. And that's what he's going to show. He's going to show that they are manipulators, cheaters, contrivers, that they fake their experiments to show a result, and they don't care about the truth. All right, because this experiment already demonstrates the truth. Okay, and the truth is you have to conserve the momentum. And when you conserve the momentum, you do create your free kinetic energy. Again, he's already conceded the point, in the sense that he's already conceded that you can't use kinetic energy to move a spaceship. It won't work. Throwing small things with high velocities out one side and throwing heavy things with slow velocities out the other side, well, you can have all kinds of kinetic energy differences you want, but the only thing that's going to matter is how much momentum you threw out one side and how much momentum went out the other side. And he's already conceded that argument. This will just be a good piece of evidence, just pointing out how the physics is bad because the scientists are bad. The scientists are the physics is corrupt by a bunch of bad ideas, bad reasoning, nonsense and woo, because the physicists made it that way. They forced it that way. Okay, not because they honestly investigated a truth. No, because they are constantly just trying to confirm their God-bothering, God-particle religion. All right, I guess it's worth going over the lever in gravity that catches is that it's able to balance, because it's basically moving the mass just a little tiny bit. So every time the lever oscillates in gravity, one side essentially compensates for the other side's motion. So it's one side's getting heavier and the other side's getting lighter. Then it switches to back and forth, back and forth. And so I think if you blow up the fulcrum, especially if you're above the center, okay, so say your fulcrum is above the center of mass of the thing hanging here, and obviously in the case of mine it would be, because I just bored a hole in here, and it would be hanging from somewhere above the center of mass of the lever. So the idea is when it tilts on an angle, all right, what it's going to do is cut through this material. This side is going to go up this way, and you're going to end up with more mass over here. This stuff that was on this side before is now on this side. So this side is going to get heavier by that amount, this hunk here. And so now it's getting heavier as it's moving, and so it's going to stop because it's getting heavier. And then as it tilts back the other way, this side will end up getting heavier as it moves up. And that's what's happening. So it's just throwing the weight back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's what's causing the lever to move back and forth. And these masses are obviously considered to be exactly the same energy. It's the same energy to move this 4 mass, 1 velocity, as it is to move this 1 mass, 4 velocity. It's obviously the same force to push those two things. They're not changing the oscillator at all. Same amount of energy to do that. Same oscillation. You can't change it. It's a rigid bar. So you don't have any choice. It has to give this one 4 times the velocity. And it weighs the same in essence, in the sense that when you do give it 4 times the velocity, that's the same pressure as this 4 mass with 1. So it's just basically saying, look, 4 atoms going 1 mile an hour is the same as 1 atom going 4 miles an hour. Or 1,000 atoms going 1 mile an hour versus 1 atom going 1,000 miles an hour. It's the same force. Alright, so it also should be understood that this argument was made to PhysicistMichael in the live video. I pointed out that I've done this experiment. It came out this way. It works. No doubt about it, all that kind of stuff. It does just oscillate fine. There's no immediate loss of energy. You can't say the fulcrum is doing anything in particular because it's not. So, you know, it's a pretty solid piece of evidence that done right, you do conserve the momentum. And you will, in fact, create free kinetic energy. In a sense, you'll have an unaccountable source for extra kinetic energy. So again, this goes back to the basic argument that everybody should know, that we don't have the tug of war between the 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour and the 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour. We don't have that tug of war. We don't have that crash even. I mean, if they crash into each other, what's going to win? Kinetic energy or momentum? Do you really think the 5-ton train is going to push with twice the force the 10-ton train out of the way? Do you really think so? Because it's not. And that you can duplicate with a Newton's cradle. You can show it doesn't happen. The thing with more kinetic energy doesn't win the battle. The thing with more momentum wins the battle. I mean, shit. So that's what he's saying he's going to prove or debunk. He's going to debunk that basic physics. He's going to prove that that momentum isn't the controlling factor in a collision, or that somehow kinetic energy is. And it's not in the real world. Anywhere in the real world. Alright, just one more example. So, I mean, he uses this term, you know, angular momentum, and he's really not talking about actually distance and movement. He's pretending that you can use this term to debunk something as basic, elemental, and physically true as the fact that you have to conserve momentum. And a spinning wheel is a great example in the sense that if I did put a 1 mass, 4 units of distance, and I put a 4 mass, 1 unit of distance, the wheel will turn the same. The same force will turn the wheel with this mass here as it will turn with this 1 mass way out here. The same force put in will get the same number of rotations, the same amount of energy, and the simple difference will be this will be going 1 velocity and this will be going 4 velocity. And the truth is, kinetic energy will not be conserved. This object will have twice the kinetic energy if you allow it to be released. So you spin the wheel with the 4 mass in here, and then you stop it and let the mass fly off. It's going to fly off with 1 velocity and 4 mass. and then I do the same thing, and I stop the wheel and let this fly off, and it's going to be 1 mass, and it's going to have 4 velocity. They say it's the same force you spun the wheel with, the same energy went into the wheel. They say this has twice the amount of energy, twice the ability to do work. Okay, work in the universe. That's what they say. That's their argument. All right, don't be, So that's what they're debunking. He's saying that isn't true. That this only moves 1.4. Okay, the velocity out here. Well, in the case of a 4 mass, it's a different number. But that it doesn't go at 4 times the velocity. And of course, it has to go 4 times the velocity because it's 4 times the distance. And, so when he says angular momentum is conserved, he's not talking about this angular momentum. He's not talking about real angular momentum. He's talking about a mathematical contrivance. And no, the contrivance is this, it will be going 4 times the velocity. This will have, by their theory, 4 times the energy. Yeah, it's not 2x, it's 4x. 4 times the energy. 4 times. 4 times the energy. That's their argument. 4 times the energy. Same exact momentum, but they're going to claim it has 4 times the energy. Frats free energy. So he says no free energy. You get no free energy out of the experiment. That's what he says. Highly accuracy. So he says conserved to a high accuracy in the collisions, and you do not get any free energy out of the experiment. It's because he put rubber springs in the experiment, because he screwed the experiment up to force it to come out his way, because he didn't bother to see how much energy he's losing by his poor arrangement, his poor setup. So it's just more contrivance for the purpose of propaganda. It's not science. It's just proving he has no integrity and no credibility. All right, probably enough of a video. So till the next time and such.